question, why are 9/11 jokes so funny? And I don't mean that sarcastically, like genuinely, why are they so funny? I was 11 years old when Vine became a thing, and soon after its release, the most popular meme format on the 6-second looping video platform was the 9/11 meme, where people edited random clips into a transition with the attacks on the World Trade Center.
Buzz! We missed the truck! We're not aiming for the truck!
These things were everywhere. There were whole compilations on YouTube dedicated to dank, edgy, and offensive memes, and most of them took 9/11 and the subsequent war as material for their jokes. And honestly, my 11-year-old edgy boy brain was hooked on them. I couldn't get enough of the Bush did 9/11 jokes or the jet fuel can't melt steel beams jokes. And at the same time as all of that, shows like Family Guy and South Park were mainstream that regularly took 9/11 and the events surrounding it as material for its satire.
9/11 was bad.
I agree with that.
So given all of this, and given the fact that I wasn't alive to see it happen, nor am I connected to any of the victims of the attack, I'm not at all surprised that 9/11 to me is more of a pop culture phenomenon than a real historical tragedy. 9/11 to me is the edgy jokes, the videos on YouTube that I watch with morbid fascination, and the day I'm told that Pete Davidson's dad died. And here I think is a good time to bring up what I think of as the distinction between edgy humor and dark humor. So edgy humor, like the kind these edgelords making the offensive meme compilations are engaging in, come from a place of cynical distance from the tragedy being joked about. Dark humor, on the other hand, doesn't come from a place of cynical distance, but from an intimate connection with the tragedy, and is often used as a way of coping with the painful reality of it. Which is why I think we associate edgy humor with immaturity, and why it seems to only ever be popular among teenage boys. Whereas dark humor, on the other hand, is seen as part of the natural process of grieving, and helps people come to terms with and make sense of and seek closure from tragedy. That's why 9/11 to me is a curious case, because it's famously one of the least funniest things to have ever happened. Immediately following the attacks on the World Trade Center, famously funny and irreverent American comedians like Conan O'Brien, Jay Leno, and David Letterman spontaneously cancelled their planned late-night shows. The Onion, the famous satire newspaper, cancelled their planned issue for that week. In fact, there's a whole Wikipedia page dedicated to humor based on 9/11, because the fact that the images of the attacks were live streamed around the whole world and shocked the whole world and deeply traumatized most Americans, it's interesting to see how it's become such an easy and common thing to joke about. The fact that 9/11, one of the most well-documented national tragedies in modern history, blurs this line between popular media event and historical event is not lost on many people. Scholars like Bill Ellis noted that 9/11, being one of the first truly international media disasters of the age of the internet, gave folklorists, the people who study the emergence of folklore narratives, the unprecedented ability to study the folklore narratives around 9/11 as they emerged in conversation in real time by going through the archives of internet message boards. And what he found was, insanely, that for some people, there was no such thing as a too soon period for what Ellis calls World Trade Center jokes, the first recorded instance being barely 2 hours after the Twin Towers collapsed on live television.
What does WTC stand for? Welcome to Canada. World Terrorist Convention. What? Trade Center.
Now, here's the thing. I think that's hilarious now, but at 12:59 Eastern Standard Time on September the 11th, 2001, when the bodies underneath the rubble of the World Trade Center haven't even been buried yet, this was obviously too soon. Even for an internet message board whose entire purpose was to collate tasteless jokes.
You sick fuck. Why don't you shut your ignorant fucking mouth? If thousands of innocent people in your country died, and you cracked jokes, I hope somebody would have the common decency to take a block of solid metal and crack your fucking skull open. Ignorant, callous shithead.
Gav, if you were here, I'd knock your ass down.
After what just happened today, and you have the gall to post crap like this, you sick bastard. Why don't you go down the street and see if there's some puppies or kittens to kick around?
Okay, so it's clear that there was indeed a too soon period, but apparently Gav here didn't get the memo. So when exactly did it become acceptable to joke about 9/11? Modeled after a study that came about after the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster of 1986, which killed 7 American astronauts, and is another example of a highly visible and televised disaster, Bill Ellis predicted that the first socially acceptable jokes to come about after 9/11 would be concentrated on denial, displaced anger, and desire to find and assign blame. These are part of the normal grief process, and already we see these themes in the statements of public officials and people on the street. However, when resident politically incorrect TV edgelord Bill Maher spontaneously made exactly this kind of attempt at humor in the context of the anger, denial, and desire to find blame surrounding the disaster on the 17th of September 2001, things did not go well for him either.
On Politically Incorrect, the show that once followed this one, he made this infamous comment less than a week after 9/11.
We have been the cowards, lobbing cruise missiles from 2,000 miles away. That's cowardly.
That is a
Staying in
terribly,
the airplane
yes.
when it hits the building.
That is
Say
a
what you want
terribly,
about it, not cowardly.
And just like for Gav here, the backlash for Maher was swift. Maher's comments made headlines around the country. And although Maher issued an apology explaining that he was criticizing US military policy and not American soldiers, it was no good. The damage had already been done, and less than a year later, Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher was cancelled for being too politically incorrect. So if 1 week after the attacks was still too soon to joke about 9/11, when did it become okay to joke about it? And I think the more important question is, what were the first 9/11 jokes to land? Unlike the planes on 9. Interestingly, Bill Ellis found that on September the 17th, the same day that Bill Maher made the 9/11 joke that got him cancelled, a list was uploaded to an online message board fittingly called alt.tasteless humor that included 45 World Trade Center jokes and a top 10 list of good things about the World Trade Center attack.
What was the first thing going through Mr. Jones' head sitting in the 90th floor of the World Trade Center? The 91st floor. What's the area code of the World Trade Center? 2-0. How many Americans died in the World Trade Center attack yesterday? Who gives a fuck?
Yikes. And of course, as you would expect, almost immediately and with the full force of the patriotic zeal of every single red-blooded, beer-drinking, flag-waving American with access to the internet, a legion of message board users descended on the author of this list. They sent them death threats and bomb threats and threats to their family and all their future family, and promised to put an end to their bloodline, and also doxed them and swatted them into oblivion until the post was taken down and the user was forced to delete themselves off the face of the internet forever. Except that didn't happen. It was more like the response was tepid, almost as if people were expecting a list like this to come out at some point. As the Twitter girlies would say, it was a flop. It didn't strike a chord with anyone. It didn't hit anyone on the funny bone. It did not resonate with a community that was still in the process of coming to terms with the tragedy. And it did not offer any new or original perspectives for people that were still trying to make sense of it. It was just gratuitously offensive, recycled, tired, edgy humor. From a cynical, chronically online troll who takes nothing to be sacred or beyond ridicule, and whose only purpose in life is to pursue amusement. So where is it? Where is the first truly mass appeal 9/11 joke? When did it happen and what did it look like, so we could get a sense of how we went from this to this in about a decade? In going through Bill Ellis's extensive research on the emergence and popularity of early World Trade Center disaster jokes, we find this specimen, a cyber cartoon, or in what today's parlance might be called, a meme, posted to a personal website within 24 hours of the attack, and which circulated on message boards that didn't even have anything to do with humor. And this one did numbers. Soon you had variations of the meme crop up on other websites. One person on a military veterans message board even spoke about putting up a printout of the meme up on the wall of his office cubicle next to an American flag. So the first acceptable jokes to come out about 9/11 were the ones that spoke to Americans' anger at the perpetrators of the attack. The Osama bin Laden memes were joined with memes like these, showing a photoshopped New York City skyline with a rebuilt World Trade Center in the shape of a pointed middle finger. Ellis also noted that the language that circulated alongside these images, "fuck you" and "up yours," spoke to the anxieties which existed around male castration, stemming from the symbolic destruction of America's most famous architectural phalluses. This was carried to its most logical extreme in pornographic cartoons, like this one, that attempted to sexually humiliate bin Laden. And I couldn't for the life of me find footage of this online, but apparently in David Letterman's first show back on air after 9/11, on September the 18th, his monologue contained a joke that involved the finger. One of Letterman's writers recalled, "New York was in crisis and at that point still needed healing and reassurance, rather than edgy comedy. So Dave would do a joke like this. There's a guy who stands in front of the Ed Sullivan Theatre, and every morning on my way to work, he gives me the finger. Well, today he gave me the finger and a hug." In retrospect, the finger and a hug metaphor can be used to describe the function of memes like these that came about in the wake of the attacks. As Bill Ellis puts it, "Thus, using the finger as a joke simultaneously turns the aggressive threat back against the terrorists and reassures their victims by promising that the gesture and spirit familiar to all New Yorkers will live on. Such memes offer the viewer, in Letterman's terms, the finger and a hug." Seeing the clearly traumatizing effects that 9/11 had on so many Americans, and the extreme sensitivity around joking about it following in the wake of the attacks, is in stark contrast to how it's treated today, almost 20 years later. As an example, when the official Warner Brothers Twitter account for the Barbie movie tweeted this in response to a fan-made poster promoting the Barbenheimer trend, depicting Margot Robbie's Barbie on the shoulders of Cillian Murphy's Oppenheimer, surrounded by the flames of an atomic explosion, as you could imagine, Japanese people were not amused. To try and show Americans how offensive it was to Japanese people that the story of the inventor of the atomic bomb that was used to kill hundreds of thousands of people and destroy 2 Japanese cities was being promoted alongside the story about Barbie dolls, Japanese Twitter users made memes using the same logic of this Barbenheimer poster to parody 9/11. And how did Americans react? Well, they didn't. Most of them loved it. So it's obvious that most Americans have moved on from 9/11. But with that being said, then why is Japan still so touchy about Oppenheimer? I mean, it's been almost 80 years, right, since the end of World War II. To put that into perspective, Sacha Baron Cohen's mockumentary Borat came out in 2006. Meaning Americans were already back to laughing at themselves a few years on from 9/11.
My name is Borat, I come from Kazakhstan. Can I say first, we support your war of terror?
So why aren't Japanese people joking about the end of World War II? Now, you could argue that you can't compare the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to 9/11 because the former are just so much worse. And to that I'd agree, they were definitely worse by any measure. But what measure are we using to decide when it's okay to joke about a tragedy? Maybe the number of deaths? Well, in that case, COVID killed 5 times as many people as Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined in America alone. And to this day is still the deadliest disaster in the US by death toll. And yet COVID memes came about plenty even while the pandemic was raging. And it still is, by the way. And to that you might say, oh, COVID is a disease. It's invisible to the naked eye, so it's so much easier to joke about it. Okay, so what about Pearl Harbor, Jonestown, Columbine? All of these are examples of other American disasters that provided shocking and very memorable visuals. So is there like a number of deaths combined with a proportionate amount of time that has to pass for jokes about them to become acceptable? If so, what's the formula? In looking for examples of other American disasters that jokes have been made about, I just went through events in my head that I remember hearing jokes about. The bombing of Pearl Harbor, for instance, that's a standard one. In fact, it's so acceptable to joke about Pearl Harbor that the fact that it's so much more acceptable to joke about Pearl Harbor than it is to joke about 9/11 is a joke in itself.
It would have been cheap. Yeah, real low-hanging fruit, and we're better than that. Pearl Harbor, on the other hand. Yeah, I think that's in bounds.
And the Jonestown massacre I remember from the drink the Kool-Aid joke that came out of it. But the Columbine High School massacre, I only looked that up to see if I could actually find people making jokes about it. Because to me, I'm not even American, but it just feels out of bounds. And thankfully, I wasn't the only one to feel that way. On this now archived post in the subreddit r/history memes, the title of the post is Columbine memes are legal now, which shows an understanding by the poster that it is not, or at least was not, socially acceptable to joke about this school shooting. But then we get some more enlightened Redditors catching on to just how awful it is. These Redditors are aware that there's something innately wrong about joking about this school shooting. They just can't articulate why. Then some class act tries to join in on the joke, and it doesn't go well for them. Now, I know for a fact that school shooter jokes aren't just common, but I've seen them enter the mainstream many times before.
I don't know, they testify in front of Congress, these kids? Like, what the fuck? What are you doing? You're young, you should be crazy, you should be unhinged. Not in a suit saying, I'm here to tell, fuck you. You're not interesting. Because you went to a high school where kids got shot? Why does that mean I have to listen to you? How does that make you interesting? You didn't get shot, you pushed some fat kid in the way, and then now I gotta listen to you talking?
So why is this joke in particular, and any attempt to normalize it, rubbing people the wrong way? Well, these r/history memes members put it into words.
I wish we wouldn't do these types of memes. I know they may be funny to some, but school shootings are horrible memes. Even as a joke may inspire some to do the shootings.
Yeah, dude. As a teacher, I can tell you actual lockdowns and shit are not funny.
So there's an understanding by people that there are still those that suffer from the reality of gun violence in America that this meme is making light of. And most people are aware that the joking itself normalizes the reality. And of course, there will always be people who don't like being policed on what they can and can't joke about. For instance, Reddit user Edgelord tries to put the Columbine meme into perspective with other memes about other tragedies they've seen on the subreddit before.
People here make lots of jokes that are not funny to the victims. The nuking of Japan, famines in Ukraine, Japanese war crimes, etc.
And the previous Redditor, a teacher in America, tries to put it into perspective with his reality.
Right, but that shit is lifetimes away for most of us, bro. I have to herd children into storage closets and keep them quiet and as unafraid as possible. I have to stop them from crying and panicking. This is the reality of a lot of people. I cope with humor, but I don't know. This is just tasteless to me.
So, some people feel entitled to joke about issues that don't necessarily affect them. Case in point, quote-unquote edgy, offensive comics like Matt Rife and Dave Chappelle. People who are only perceived as funny to the most antisocial people in the population. Like people who hate women or have never met a trans person in their life. This is also the logic behind a lot of the edgy 9/11 memes. Most of the people who find them funny are from my generation, Gen Z, who were either not born during 9/11 or just were too young to have been witness to it. So they're not really coming from a place of experience with the tragedy, but cynical distance from it, which makes them edgy humor as opposed to dark humor. So if cynicism is the mark of edgy humor, and emotional intimacy is the mark of dark humor, what does it say about the fact that 9/11 is so open to being mocked and made fun of? So if the reason that 9/11 jokes are funny is because you're technically not supposed to joke about it, then the ubiquity of 9/11 jokes in our culture is our way of showing contempt for the people who tell us that we can't joke about it. Namely, contempt for the US government and their bootlickers who used the shock and horror of 9/11 as a justification for waging its war on terror. Just as the joke that Bill Maher made on September the 17th, 2001 was a way of him testing what he could and could not criticize about US military policy, the Bush did 9/11 jokes and the jet fuel can't melt steel beams jokes came from claims that the 9/11 truther movement made about how 9/11 was an inside job by the US government as an excuse for them to go to war with Iraq. Now, I'm not going to go into the merits or inaccuracies of 9/11 conspiracy theories, but the point is these jokes gained popularity in a group much larger and outside the 9/11 conspiracy movement because they aired deeply held frustrations that people held toward US military policy and conveyed emotional truths that underlied all these jokes that boiled down to, in one way or another, we were lied to, and we were lied to. The CIA released a report in 2005 showing that they did not find any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And for 20 years now, no one has been held accountable for the over 1 million people killed in Iraq. And for 20 years, the only way that the culture was able to air its grievances about US military policy in any meaningful way was through satire. And so no wonder, after 20 years of the only mainstream criticism of US military policy being in the form of 9/11 jokes, Osama bin Laden's letter to America, published over 20 years ago, goes viral on TikTok. And it's because for 20 years, the mainstream media did not question America and the West's presence in the Middle East. And again, for 20 years, the only way we were allowed to humanize the people who were blamed for starting the West's quote-unquote war on terror was again through satire and jokes and memes. This whole fiasco is actually so funny to me. Like, bin Laden's full letter was on the Guardian's website for 20 years, and only now they decide to take it down after people actually start reading it, as opposed to, just vaguely knowing that it exists on the internet. And honestly, this was such a stupid move from them. Like, Gen Z don't even like to read. Most of us are dyslexic and have ADHD. We can't read. And this move made us want to read it all the more. And surprise, surprise, people are finding out that man had some points. Okay, now look, I'm not trying to defend the guy that killed Pete Davidson's dad. But I think the people that read the letter before it got taken down understood that there was value to be had in humanizing the villain, not so that you can normalize the villain's behavior, but so you can understand how anyone can become the villain given the right circumstances. And the fact is that satire is just not good at getting us to empathize because it trivializes and oversimplifies as it ridicules. And although it offers us comfort during times of tragedy, dark humor taken too far can become an overindulgence in cynicism and sends us far into the realm of absurdity, to the point that it makes it harder for us to tell what we can and can't joke about. And worse still, in making everything unserious, it paralyzes us from being able to act on things that shock and disturb us. Sami Obeid is a Palestinian-American writer and stand-up comedian. He recently started coming up on my YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok feeds in the wake of the genocide in Gaza. Initially, I found comfort in finding someone joking about the things that have been gripping me with anger and grief for months.
I've been talking about being Palestinian in my act for like 16 years, and which explains why we're in a small room right now. Growing up, Palestinians, we didn't have the best PR in America. So I've always been letting people know I am a proud Palestinian and I am your friend. I'm very friendly, okay? I am your friend. I put the pal in Palestinian.
We lost 4, we lost 6, 4. All right, cool. So all I said was I'm a friendly Palestinian.
But do you understand? Do you understand? I haven't even said the shit that they probably wouldn't like.
But as I kept watching more and more of his recent material, I started becoming uneasy again. And I remembered what Hannah Gadsby, a queer write-up and stand-up comedian, said about the dynamics at play when marginalized people joke about themselves to a non-marginalized audience.
Do you understand what self-deprecation means when it comes from somebody who already exists in the margins? It's not humility, it's humiliation. I put myself down in order to speak, in order to seek permission to speak. And I simply will not do that anymore, not to myself or anybody who identifies with me.
And so what I realize is going on when Sami Obeid, a Palestinian-American comic, gets on stage to perform for a mostly white American audience during the ongoing genocide of his peoples, the elephant in the room is not the war in Gaza. A white person getting up on stage doesn't have to talk about the war in Gaza. No, the elephant in the room is Sami. And the only way that Sami can get to them to share his story in a way that doesn't make them uncomfortable is by making jokes about it.
It's like levels of a video game. There's like level 1 Zionism, which is like, I believe the Jews should have a homeland and they should be safe. And you're like, hell yeah, who would disagree with that? You'd have to be a monster to disagree with that. And then there's level 2, which is like, yeah, it should specifically be in Palestine, and they're going to have to work it out with the Palestinians. And you're like, okay, where is this going? And then there's level 3 Zionism, which is suddenly like, God wants me to be here, and if you got a problem with that, say hello to my little friend. Like, whoa, whoa. I'm just trying to pick olives, man. And those are like the lower levels. The most extreme level of Zionism isn't even coming from Jewish people. It's coming from the Christians, the evangelicals. Christian Zionism, that's the wildest one. That's like the final level. That's like all Jews proceed to the Holy Land so Jesus can commence the end times. Like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What was that?
And don't get me wrong, it is a marker of Sami's comic genius that he can find a way to explain the nuances of Zionism in a way that is funny and relatable to this audience. And although most of his shows that I've seen always have a couple of Zionists in the audience heckling or walking out on him, most of the people in the audience find his material funny, which means they are on Sami's side. They are aware of what's going on and have some sense of who is in the right and who is in the wrong. But the only way this largely liberal millennial American audience, you know, people who are raised on Sesame Street, get their news from Saturday Night Live and their opinions from John Oliver, can stomach hearing a Palestinian American share their story is while they're being entertained. And don't get me wrong, I realize that they're at a stand-up comedy gig, and also that Gen Z aren't that much better at being able to be sincere and serious. In fact, we've taken coping using irony to a whole new level. And neither am I trying to say that Sami Obeid can't joke about these things. Sami is a millennial too, and going through his older material and also his YouTube videos, it's clear to me that the only way he was able to get an audience for his content on Palestine is by learning to be funny about it. But I just think that like the Redditors who knew that joking about gun violence runs the risk of normalizing it, I think we should be beyond joking about wars and genocides that our own governments are committing. Like, the urgency is there. The problem is very much alive and is affecting lots of people. And since most people living in the West aren't the main victims of Western imperialism, dark humor isn't necessarily there to help us cope with grief. It's there to keep fueling our cynicism and help us cope with the discomfort that we feel in our inability to do anything to change the situation. And so it further distances us from the state of mind needed to actually act toward creating any change. So is that going to be the moral of the video? Stop making jokes. Stop finding things funny. Look, okay, no, because I think we should keep making fun of how incompetent and infantilized IDF soldiers are, because that will always be hilarious. But I guess I just want us to be more conscious of the political dynamics behind the things that we find funny. And I'm not talking about the punching up, punching down test that liberals apply to satire to check if it's socially acceptable or not. I think that shit is incredibly morally simplistic. Satirists should be able to punch wherever the joke is. But I guess it's exactly that. I think we should be more critical of where exactly the joke is. Like, what are we laughing at and why are we laughing at it? The consequences of these questions are huge. Because we live in a society where the people entrusted with keeping powerful people accountable are in bed with the powerful people. And the only people left to tell the truth were the ones who, before things got out of hand, were making fun of the powerful people. Satire as a means of exposing the truth is all well and good, but if it ends up setting the tone for all political discourse, it just becomes a way of coping with painful realities. Although these memes and jokes and gags do a good job of cutting through disinformation efficiently, to reveal the more deeply held beliefs underlying everything that we laugh at. When we overdo it, we replace genuine political discourse with inconsequential folklore, which has the effect of robbing us of our ability to organize toward concrete political goals. And worse still, it makes it easier for powerful people to hide behind all the irony and the unseriousness. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. I really need to find a better way to end these videos. Can you tell I'm bad at goodbyes? If you like this video, please like and subscribe. But most importantly, something you can do for free that will help me a lot in the uphill battle that I'm having with the YouTube algorithm is to please just leave a comment, anything, literally. If you don't know what to say, just like, tell me what you had for breakfast. Like, it really does help in helping me trying to build an audience and get my stuff noticed. Also, I have a Patreon now. Please consider joining if you have the means. You can get your name mentioned in the credits of all future videos. That's what I'll do. I'll end my videos with credits. But yeah, it took me just under a month to write and film and edit this video full time, and I have more in the works, but I can't afford to keep this pace up for much longer. So if you like what I'm doing and believe in what I'm doing, please consider joining my Patreon. Okay, thanks, bye.